G'day, Mike here with another episode of Mike Making Munch. That's right, it's munch time, and I'm Mike, and I'm making it. Making rice in the rice cooker, and in the steaming basket I've got some carrot and an egg. Egg for H. I'm going to cook a sausage for me. Wowee, delish. What a fun time. You know what? Like, we had a lecture today talking a bit about the Trinity. And I'm like, I like talking about the Trinity. So I'm going to talk about the Trinity because it's significant. It's actually, like, it's a significant reason why I trust Jesus. That's a significant reason why I'm a Christian, is the Trinity. Now, like, that kind of seems maybe a bit odd because sometimes people are like, oh, but Trinity, that's a reason to say that Christianity is bogus, because the Trinity, it's hard to understand, which I'm like, oh, just because something's hard to understand doesn't make it bogus. Like, no one uses that argument with, well, okay, people use that argument with the earth being round and stuff. That's weird. Not many people use this argument. In terms of, like, relativity, people are like, yeah, sick, relativity, love it. Even though it's not the easiest thing to understand. Like, plenty of people do. And when we understand it, we're standing on shoulders of giants, which is a Newton reference, who was pre-Einstein. So even figuring out F equals ma, that was something that was like, that's hard to understand and hard to figure out. But Newton said, no, it's not all me. It's me standing on shoulders of giants. And then for me, I'm just like, I just read it in the textbook at school. Like, it's not anything about me to understand it. But I think that, like, that's the thing for me, that, like, at school, I got introduced to relativity. That we did simple relativity, and we learnt the equations, and yeah. I was just like, but isn't this impossible to know stuff? And it's not. You just learn it. That's right. And the Trinity is kind of like that. Maybe it can seem a bit impossible to know, but it's not a reason to be all like, well, the speed of light isn't a real thing. It must be a wave. Like, Michelson-Morley proved that light is not just a wave on the ether. Yeah, important thing. So light is also a wave and a particle, and doesn't have a medium except for the medium it creates for itself. It's not exactly the thing that I was going to talk to you about. But yeah, but the Trinity is, there's a difficulty to understanding it, but there's an internal coherence that makes things work. See, without the Trinity, Jesus dying on the cross is a nonsense. So if you've got the Trinity, if you've got three different gods, so you've got Father, Son, and Spirit, if they're three different gods and they're separate, then the cross doesn't really work. Like, then Jesus is dying, like, as a separate God, trying to save people away from the Father, who then would be the God of wrath, who's trying to destroy people. And so Jesus, as a separate God, tries to rescue people away from God. But it just, I don't know, it's hard for me to figure out because it's not true. And but it wouldn't work. Like, that's kind of the problem for it. So I need to fix the rice. Or another option could be that you only have one God. And that the one God sometimes is like God the Father, but then sometimes he appears to people as the Son, and sometimes appears as the Spirit. But then that doesn't work at the cross, because at the cross there needs to be a within God interaction. Like, you need Jesus to be providing an atonement by appeasing the Father's wrath. So the Father's wrath is spent on the Son. And the Spirit is there, like, working it. So in Hebrews 9, 13, 14? 13. I don't know. It's one of those two verses. Hebrews 9:13. That's what I'll say. Maybe I'm wrong. The Spirit offers up the Son to the Father. So that all three are interacting with each other. So you can't have a God that is only one God, because then the cross couldn't make any sense. Like, he couldn't be spending his own wrath against himself. It needs to be different persons interacting. But they need to be the same and united and not divided against each other. Like, the Bible's pretty clear about there being one God and one purpose to Jesus coming to save. He's not a rival God who tries to save people away from himself. And then people also might say that, well, Jesus comes from the Father, but he's less than the Father. So Jehovah's Witnesses typically say this, that he's also a God, but he's a bit less value than the one true God. So they kind of take out the separate gods, not all one. But then, particularly for their view, then Jesus is not of the value of the Father. He's not equal value, he's less. So that means when Jesus dies on the cross, he deals with a certain amount of wrath, but then there's this gap, Father and Son, that's left over, and then that remains, that needs to be atoned for. And yeah, then that's what? 10% of an infinite God? 10% of infinity is still infinity. It's still something that no human can ever pay off in a million lifetimes. Like, it's impossible. So the only way that the cross can work, can function, is by a triune God. So, yeah. And so, as much as people might be like, oh yeah, it's like that's a reason why to not believe the gospel, not believe in Jesus, because it's hard to understand, that the whole Trinity thing's hard to understand. Well, I'm kind of a bit like, well, if God was easy to understand, what would that make him? It would just make him human. It wouldn't make him transcendent. Like, the fact that we can say anything about God, that is actually the part that is hard to understand. God should be transcendent, because there should be this divide between God and everything else, that he is the first mover, he is the creator that makes everything, and he is not made. And that's an important part of being the first mover, that you are not moved. So it's important for our definition of God that he is uncreated. And so there has to be this distinction, and that creates a question of how can a created thing know its creator, because they're not of the same kind. But God makes it so that we can know him, even to the point where he sends his Son, who is one with himself, who has his same essence, but Jesus takes on our essence and becomes human as well as becoming God. And so he's truly God and truly man. He must be truly man as well for the cross to make sense. So if it's just Jesus looks divine, or looks human, but is truly divine, when he goes to the cross, he can't stand truly in place of humans. Right? He can provide an atonement for his own kind. He can represent his own kind. But if he's not human, then he can't represent us. But if he is truly human, then he can represent us. So, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of hard things to understand in the gospel, sure. Why not? But the thing is, it lets us have a peep and a look at who God himself is. And that's an impossible thing. And so it's a wonderful thing. Well, of course it's going to be hard to understand. Like, you think relativity is going to be easy to understand. You think knowing God himself is going to be easy to understand. That's silly to be like, oh, it's not easy, it can't be true. Like, plenty of things are hard. Going for a run is hard. Anyway, that's been quite a long rant. And food is nearly done. Yeah. Well, that's been Mike Making Lunch for this week. Well done. Another week already. Wild. I will catch you on Monday. See you later.